I never thought I'd be the kind of person to visit graveyards at midnight. But here I was, gravel crunching under my boots as I walked past headstones that looked like broken teeth in the moonlight. My flashlight beam danced across names and dates I couldn't read, didn't want to read. I wasn't here for the dead. I was here because of what Sheriff Brennan told me 3 weeks ago. "Marcus," he'd said, leaning back in his creaky office chair, "I need someone I can trust. Someone who won't ask too many questions." I should have asked more questions. The Willowbrook Cemetery sits on the edge of our small town like a forgotten thought. During the day, it's peaceful enough, old ladies bringing flowers, joggers using the paths as shortcuts. But at night, it transforms into something else entirely. The kind of place where shadows move wrong and sounds carry further than they should. Sheriff Brennan had been getting reports. Nothing official, nothing he could put in a file. Just whispers from residents who lived near the cemetery. Strange lights. Voices when there shouldn't be any. People walking among the graves long after the gates were supposed to be locked. "Probably just kids," he'd said, but his eyes told a different story. "Still, we need to check it out." Quietly. So here I was, 3 weeks into my unofficial night patrol, walking through Willowbrook Cemetery at 12:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt more like a nightmare. My radio crackled softly on my belt, turned down low. Brennan insisted on radio silence unless it was an emergency. That should have been my first red flag. I'd been doing this long enough to know when something felt wrong. 22 years as a deputy, 15 of those working nights. I knew the difference between shadows and movement, between wind and whispers. And what I was seeing in Willowbrook Cemetery wasn't wind. The first time I spotted them, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. 3 figures moving between the headstones in Section K, the oldest part of the cemetery. They moved with purpose, not like vandals or teenagers looking for thrills. They carried shovels. I radioed Brennan immediately that first night. "Sheriff, I've got activity in Section K. 3 individuals with digging equipment." Static filled the channel for a long moment before his voice came through, distorted and strange. "Marcus, you need to be absolutely certain about what you're seeing." "Are you certain?" I watched the figures working, their movements synchronized like they'd done this before. Many times before. "Affirmative, Sheriff." "Should I approach?" "Negative. Observe only. Do not engage. Do not approach. Radio silence unless they see you." The line went dead. I watched them work for 2 hours. They dug with efficiency that spoke of experience, their movements coordinated in the darkness. When they finished, they filled the hole back in, smoothed the dirt, replaced the sod. By the time they left, you'd never know they'd been there. Except I knew exactly where they'd been digging. Right on top of Martha Henley's grave. Martha, who died 3 months ago in what everyone said was a tragic accident. The second night they were back. Same section, different grave. This time it was Robert Chin, the accountant who'd driven his car into Miller's Pond back in September. Another accident, everyone said. Another tragedy. By the 4th night, I started keeping a list. Martha Henley car accident, March. Robert Chin drove into Pond, September. Diana Foster fell downstairs, January. Kyle Morrison overdose, December. Jennifer Walsh house fire, February. All accidents. All within the past year. All in Section K. I should have connected the dots sooner. Should have realized that 5 accidental deaths in a town of 3,200 people was more than statistical probability. Should have wondered why Sheriff Brennan was so interested in keeping this quiet. Should have wondered why he always knew exactly when to send me to the cemetery. The pattern became clear on night 7. I arrived at my usual time, parked in the maintenance shed shadow, and made my way to my observation point behind the old mausoleum. But this time, they were waiting for me. "Evening, Marcus." Sheriff Brennan stepped out from behind a headstone, his uniform pressed and clean despite the late hour. Behind him, 3 other figures emerged from the darkness. I recognized 2 of them immediately, Deputy Collins and Mayor Hartwell. The third was Dr. Sarah Kim from the hospital. Sheriff? My hand instinctively moved toward my weapon, but stopped. These were people I'd known for years. People I'd trusted. You've been very thorough in your observations, Brennan said, moving closer. Very detailed reports. What reports? You told me radio silence. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was something else entirely. The reports you've been filing without realizing it, Marcus. Every night, watching us work. Cataloging our activities. Making sure we didn't miss anything. The world tilted sideways. I don't understand. Of course you don't. That's what made you perfect for this job. Dr. Kim stepped forward, her voice clinical and detached. We needed someone observant, someone trustworthy, someone who wouldn't ask the wrong questions at the wrong time. We needed a witness. Mayor Hartwell added. Someone who could verify that we were being careful. Professional. That we weren't leaving any evidence behind. My throat felt like sandpaper. Evidence of what? Brennan gestured toward the freshly disturbed graves around us. Municipal budget shortfalls are a serious problem, Marcus. Healthcare costs, pension obligations, infrastructure repair. Sometimes creative solutions are necessary. Bodies don't just disappear from morgues. Dr. Kim said matter-of-factly. There are records, procedures, chains of custody. But bodies that are already buried? Bodies that have already been processed through the system? Those can be redistributed. Redistributed where? Medical schools pay very well for anatomical specimens. Mayor Hartwell explained. Research facilities, pharmaceutical companies. The demand far exceeds the legal supply. I felt sick. These people died accidentally? No, Marcus. They didn't. The words hung in the air like poison. Martha Henley discovered irregularities in the municipal accounts. Robert Chin was helping her investigate. Diana Foster worked at the courthouse and had access to records we couldn't risk being examined. Kyle Morrison was Robert's roommate who asked too many questions after Robert died. Jennifer Walsh was Martha's sister. Brennan was still smiling that wrong smile. All very neat. All very careful. All designed to look like accidents to anyone who wasn't looking too closely. Asterisk, what happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Asterisk. You killed them. We solved problems. Dr. Kim corrected. Municipal problems, personal problems, financial problems. Multiple solutions from single actions. Very efficient. And you needed me to make sure you were being careful. I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. You needed someone to watch and confirm that you weren't leaving evidence. Exactly. Someone whose testimony would be believed if questions were ever asked. Someone who could swear that the graves showed no signs of disturbance, that nothing unusual had occurred. Deputy Collins spoke for the first time, his voice hollow. Someone who could provide an alibi for the times of death, confirm that we were all exactly where we were supposed to be. I thought about all those nights, all those radio calls. Brennan always seemed to know exactly when to send me here, exactly when the digging would happen. Because he was scheduling it. Because they were all in it together. How long? I whispered. 18 months. Mayor Hartwell said. Ever since the state funding cuts. Ever since we realized we were going to lose everything. The hospital, the fire department, half the police force. Sometimes you have to make hard choices. Sometimes you have to choose who lives and who dies. Brennan added. Who's valuable to the community and who's expendable. Dr. Kim opened a medical bag I hadn't noticed before. The beautiful thing about midazolam is how quickly it works. How easily it mimics natural death when combined with the right circumstances. Car accidents become more believable when the victim loses consciousness at exactly the right moment. House fires spread faster when the occupant doesn't wake up to escape. Collins said. Drownings happen when people can't swim to shore. Mayor Hartwell finished. I backed away from them, but there was nowhere to go. We were surrounded by graves, by darkness, by the evidence of what they'd done. Why are you telling me this? Brennan's smile widened. Because you've served your purpose, Marcus. You've been our witness, our verification, our insurance policy. But insurance policies expire. And because, Dr. Kim added, drawing a syringe from her bag, we have a new problem that needs solving. What problem? You, Collins said simply. I turned to run, but they were faster. Collins and Hartwell grabbed my arms while Dr. Kim approached with the syringe. Brennan watched, that horrible smile never leaving his face. Don't worry, Marcus. It'll look like a heart attack. Very believable for a man your age, especially with your family history. You'll be found tomorrow morning right here in the cemetery, probably investigating reports of vandalism. Very tragic. Very unfortunate. The needle went into my arm before I could struggle free. Asterisk, this is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. Asterisk. But I wasn't the hero. I was just another problem to be solved. The drug worked fast, just like Dr. Kim promised. My vision blurred, my legs gave out, and I found myself on the ground among the headstones, surrounded by people I'd trusted with my life. People who'd been using me to cover their tracks while they murdered citizens and sold their bodies. As consciousness faded, I heard Brennan talking into his radio. Dispatch, this is Sheriff Brennan. I need an ambulance at Willowbrook Cemetery. Deputy Matthews appears to have suffered a cardiac event while investigating reports of vandalism. Please notify his wife. Even as I died, they were crafting the story. Making it neat. Making it clean. Making it believable. But here's what they didn't know about Deputy Marcus Matthews. 22 years on the force, 15 years working nights. I always kept backup recordings. The digital recorder in my jacket pocket had been running every night for 3 weeks. Every conversation, every confession, every detail of their operation. Set to upload automatically to a secure server every 6 hours. By the time my body was found the next morning, the recordings were already in the hands of the state police. By noon, FBI agents were examining the graves in Section K. By evening, the whole conspiracy was unraveling. Sheriff Brennan, Deputy Collins, Mayor Hartwell, and Dr. Kim were all arrested within 24 hours. The bodies were exhumed, autopsies revealed the midazolam, and the paper trail led investigators to the illegal organ trade network they'd been feeding. They thought they were so careful. They thought they'd covered every angle. They never considered that the dead could speak. But sometimes, in small towns where everyone knows everyone, the dead have the loudest voices of all. Sometimes they speak through the people who are supposed to protect them. Sometimes they speak through recordings made by deputies who knew something was wrong but didn't know how wrong until it was too late. And sometimes, if you listen carefully on quiet nights near Willowbrook Cemetery, you can still hear them speaking. Warning the living about the monsters who walk among them, wearing badges and stethoscopes and smiles that hide the darkest truths of all. The first threatening letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under old Mrs. Henderson's front door while she slept. When she called our department at 6:47 a.m., her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Deputy Walsh," she whispered, "someone knows about Jimmy." Jimmy was her son who died in Vietnam 43 years ago. Jimmy was also the son she'd never told anyone about, the one she'd given up for adoption at 16 before moving to Millfield and starting over. The one whose existence she'd buried so deep that even her late husband never knew. But someone knew. Someone had written it all down in careful block letters: his birth date, the adoption agency, even the name she'd given him before signing the papers. Details that existed only in sealed records and her own memory. "I think it's just a prank, Mrs. Henderson," I told her, but my stomach was already turning. Because 3 days earlier, Tom Rodriguez from the hardware store had called about a similar letter. And before that, Sarah Chen from the post office. All about secrets they thought no one could possibly know. The calls kept coming. Every few days, another resident would contact the sheriff's department in a panic. Someone had left them a note with information that should have been impossible to obtain. Margaret Sims received a letter detailing every penny she'd skimmed from the church collection plate over the past decade. Frank Morris got one describing his affair with his secretary in 1987, dates, locations, even conversations. Julie Brennan's letter contained transcripts of therapy sessions she'd had in another state under a different name. The notes never made demands. Never asked for money or threatened violence. They just knew things. Impossible things. And they made sure the recipients understood that their deepest secrets weren't secret anymore. By the third week, I'd documented 14 cases. 14 long-time residents who'd received letters containing information that should have been impossible to obtain. No obvious pattern in terms of social status, age, or gender. But there was a pattern. I just wasn't seeing it yet. The breakthrough came when I started mapping the incidents chronologically. When I cross-referenced them with other events in town, something clicked. Every single letter had been delivered within 24 hours of the victim having some kind of interaction with our department. Traffic stops, noise complaints, welfare checks, routine patrols. Nothing major, nothing that would normally warrant a second thought. Mrs. Henderson had called us about a suspicious car the day before her letter arrived. Tom Rodriguez had been issued a warning for a broken taillight. Sarah Chin had filed a report about mail theft. Every victim had recent contact with law enforcement. That's when I started looking at my colleagues differently. Sheriff Morrison had been running the department for 18 years. Deputy Collins was his nephew, hired straight out of the academy. Deputy Martinez had 15 years' experience, and was planning to retire next spring. And then there was me, Deputy Kevin Walsh. 4 people with access to files, reports, and personal information that gets shared during routine police interactions. 4 people who knew when and where these incidents were happening. The answer came from an unexpected source, my own mailbox. The letter was waiting for me when I got home, tucked between bills and junk mail. Same block lettering, same cheap paper as all the others. But this one was addressed to me. Inside was a phone number and a message. "Call me. We need to talk. A friend." I stared at that number for 3 hours before I finally dialed it. "Deputy Walsh?" The voice was male, middle-aged, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." "Figure what out?" "That you've been helping me for the past 6 months without realizing it." My blood went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. Every traffic stop you've made. Every report you've filed. Every conversation you've had with residents during welfare checks and routine patrols. You've been very thorough in your documentation, Deputy. Very detailed." I thought about my reports, my habit of including personal observations and context in my files. Things I'd learned about people during casual conversations. "You've been reading my reports. I've been reading everyone's reports. But yours are particularly useful. You have a gift for getting people to open up, for remembering small details, for connecting pieces of information in interesting ways. How are you accessing our files?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's the wrong question, Deputy. The right question is, how long have I been paying someone in your department to provide them?" Asterisk what happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Asterisk. Someone in our department was selling information. Someone I worked with every day, someone I trusted, was feeding private details about our residents to a stranger who was using them to terrorize the community. "Who?" I whispered. "What matters is that you've been contributing to my collection without knowing it. Your detailed reports, your personal observations, your talent for getting people to share their stories, it's all been very valuable." I felt sick. Every conversation I'd had with residents, every detail I'd noted in my reports, it had all been used against them. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something, Deputy Walsh. Information is power. Real power. When you know someone's secrets, you own them. You can control them. What's your point?" "My point is that I know everyone's secrets now. Thanks to your department's excellent record-keeping and my associates' willingness to share, I have detailed files on every significant resident of Millfield. Their fears, their shames, their hidden pasts. I know who's having affairs, who's stealing money, who's hiding criminal records. And you're using that information to terrorize people. I'm using that information to remind people that privacy is an illusion. That there's always someone watching, someone listening, someone keeping track. Why? What's the point of scaring people? Fear is useful, deputy. Fearful people are compliant people. Compliant people are controllable. And controllable people are profitable. I understood now. This wasn't random harassment. It was systematic intimidation designed to give someone leverage over the entire community. You're blackmailing people. I'm providing a service. People pay me to keep their information private. It's very simple, very effective, and completely legal as long as I never actually threaten anyone. The letters are threats. The letters are demonstrations. Proof that I have the information. What people choose to do with that knowledge, whether they decide to support my business interests or political preferences, that's entirely up to them. Who's your source in the department? Another laugh. Your colleague has been very cooperative, very professional, and very well compensated for their services. The line went dead. Asterisk, this is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. Asterisk. The next morning, I arrived at the station early and started going through personnel files, case reports, and duty rosters. If someone was providing information to an outside source, there would be traces. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The data breach had been going on for over 2 years. Someone had been copying files, photographing documents, even recording conversations. Not just my reports, everyone's reports. Not just current cases, old cases, closed cases, sealed cases. Financial records showed regular cash deposits into someone's personal account. Large deposits, made monthly, always in amounts just below the reporting threshold. When I matched the deposit dates with case files, the pattern became clear. The deposits always came after major incidents that generated detailed reports with personal information. I knew who it was before I found the final evidence hidden in a locked desk drawer, a prepaid phone, 3 USB drives, and a handwritten list of every resident who'd received a threatening letter. Deputy Martinez looked up when I entered the squad room with the evidence bag. "Working late again, Walsh?" He smiled, but something flickered in his eyes. "Find something interesting?" "Very interesting." I set the bag on his desk. "Want to explain why you have a burner phone and USB drives hidden in your workspace?" His smile faded. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The cash deposits, Martinez. The timing, the amounts, the correlation with our case files. You've been selling information to someone who's been terrorizing our community." He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Walsh." "Then explain it to me. You think this is about money? This is bigger than you understand. Bigger than Millfield." "What's bigger?" "The man you talk to. He's part of a network that collects information from small towns across the country. Police reports, medical records, school files, courthouse documents. They gather it all and sell it to whoever's willing to pay." "Sell it to who?" "Political operatives. Corporate intelligence firms. Private investigators. Anyone who needs leverage. Small towns are gold mines because people trust each other, share personal information freely, and never think their secrets will travel beyond the city limits." I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole. "How many towns?" "Hundreds. Maybe thousands. They recruit local sources, cops, clerks, nurses, teachers, anyone with access to personal information. They pay well, they're discreet, and they never ask their sources to do anything obviously illegal. Just betray everyone they're supposed to protect." Martinez laughed bitterly. "You still don't get it. This isn't about betrayal. It's about survival. You know what my pension is worth? I've got 15 years of service, and I'll be lucky to afford a studio apartment when I'm 65. So you sold out the entire community. I provided information to people who were going to get it anyway. You think privacy exists anymore? Everything is recorded, everything is tracked, everything is for sale. I just made sure I got paid for something that was happening whether I participated or not. And the people getting those letters? The fear, the paranoia? Collateral damage. Unavoidable in the modern world. He stood up, reaching for his jacket. You can turn me in if you want. Won't change anything. They'll find another source within a month. Where are you going? Home. To pack. He paused at the door. Advice, Walsh? Don't dig any deeper. Some things are bigger than one person can handle. Some fights you can't win. I called the state police that night. Told them everything I'd discovered. They were interested, professional, and completely unsurprised. We've been tracking similar operations in rural communities across 3 states. The detective told me. Information harvesting, they call it. Very sophisticated, very profitable, and very difficult to prosecute. What happens now? We'll investigate. We'll try to trace the network. He paused. But Deputy Walsh? This kind of operation, once it's established in a community, it doesn't just disappear. They'll replace your colleague. Find new sources. Adapt and continue. So the letters will keep coming? The letters were just the beginning. Once they have enough information on enough people, they don't need letters anymore. They have control. Martinez was gone by morning. Left a resignation letter and disappeared. The investigation continued for months but led nowhere conclusive. New letters stopped appearing, but the damage was done. Trust had been broken. Privacy had been violated. Fear had taken root. And I was left with the knowledge that in small towns across America, similar operations were probably continuing. Local sources feeding information to shadowy networks. Secrets being harvested and weaponized. Communities being controlled through the simple, devastating power of knowing too much. The most terrifying part. How easy it had been. How willing people were to share their stories with someone they trusted. How much damage could be done with nothing more than careful observation and detailed note-taking. Information is power. And in the right hands, it's the most dangerous weapon of all. Some nights, I still wonder which of my current colleagues might be keeping their own secret files. Sheriff David Chin first noticed the man in the blue sedan on a Tuesday morning outside the courthouse. Nothing unusual about that. People waited in cars outside government buildings all the time. But something about the way the man's eyes followed Chen's movements through the windshield made his skin crawl. The next day, the same car was parked across from the diner where Chen ate lunch. Same man, same watching eyes, same uncomfortable feeling that he was being studied like a specimen under a microscope. By Thursday, Chen realized he was being followed. Deliberately. Professionally. And there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. You're being paranoid. His deputy, Sarah Williams, told him during their morning briefing. People drive blue sedans. Doesn't mean they're following you. But Chen knew the difference between coincidence and surveillance. 23 years in law enforcement had taught him to recognize when someone was tracking his movements, documenting his routines, learning his patterns. Every time Chen tried to get close enough to read the license plate, the car would pull away. Not quickly, not obviously, just a casual departure that looked perfectly normal. But Chen knew better. This was someone who understood professional surveillance. Chen tried following the man, but somehow he always lost him in traffic. The man only revealed himself when Chen was alone, vulnerable, isolated. After 2 weeks of this psychological chess game, Chen ran the partial license plate through the DMV database. What he found made his blood run cold. The car was registered to Michael Torres, age 34, no permanent address listed. But when Chen ran Torres' name through the criminal database, he found something that shouldn't have existed, a sealed federal file with classification levels that required clearance Chen didn't have. I need to know about Michael Torres, Chen told FBI agent Lisa Morrison during their hastily arranged meeting at a coffee shop 40 miles from town. Morrison's expression didn't change, but Chen caught the slight hesitation. I can't discuss active federal investigations, Sheriff. This isn't about an investigation. This is about a man who's been stalking me for 2 weeks. And I can't do anything about it because apparently he's under federal protection. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying Chen's face with the intensity of someone making a difficult decision. Sheriff Chen, she finally said, there are things happening in your jurisdiction that you're not aware of. Things that require oversight. What kind of oversight? The kind that ensures local law enforcement doesn't interfere with operations bigger than their understanding. Chen felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. You're having me watched because you don't trust me to do my job. It's not about trust, Sheriff. It's about containment. Morrison leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. 3 months ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that organized crime elements were planning to establish operations in rural counties across the state. Small towns, limited resources, minimal oversight. And you think they're targeting my county? We know they are. The question is whether they're planning to work around local law enforcement or through it. The implication hit Chen like a freight train. You think I'm compromised. We think someone in your department might be. The surveillance isn't just about you, Sheriff. It's about everyone you interact with, everyone you trust, everyone who has access to sensitive information. Chen's mind raced through the possibilities. His department was small, just 5 officers including himself. Sarah Williams, his deputy. Tom Rodriguez, who'd been with the department for 12 years. Mike Foster, the newest hire. Janet Lee, their dispatcher and records keeper. One of them was potentially working with organized crime. And the federal government was having him watched to see which one. Asterisk, what happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Asterisk. How long has this been going on? Chen asked. The surveillance on you? 6 weeks. The investigation into your department? 3 months. Chen realized that everything he noticed about the man following him was just the tip of the iceberg. His entire professional life had been under federal scrutiny for months. What kind of communications did you intercept? Morrison hesitated. References to a sheriff protocol in your county. Discussions about establishing local cooperation for transportation routes. Money transfers linked to accounts we've traced to your jurisdiction. Chen felt sick. Someone in his department, someone he trusted, was potentially involved in a criminal organization planning to use his jurisdiction as a base of operations. Now you go back to work and pretend this conversation never happened. Morrison continued. Agent Torres will continue his surveillance, but now you'll know why he's there. You watch your people, Sheriff. Watch them carefully. Chen drove back to town with his mind spinning. Back at the station, he looked at his small team with new eyes. Sarah Williams had been handling scheduling lately, deciding which officers responded to which calls. Tom Rodriguez was approaching retirement, constantly talking about financial worries. Mike Foster was young and deeply in debt from police academy training. Janet Lee had access to everything: dispatch records, case files, scheduling information. Chen realized he was looking at 4 people he trusted with his life, trying to figure out which one had betrayed that trust. The paranoia was eating him alive. The answer came from his own home security system. That evening, Chen was reviewing footage from his doorbell camera when he noticed something strange. The timestamp showed Torres' blue sedan driving past his house multiple times throughout the day, but there were gaps in the surveillance that didn't make sense. Chen started cross-referencing the gaps with his work schedule and significant events in town. What he found made his blood run cold. Every time Torres disappeared from his surveillance post, something happened in Chen's jurisdiction. A burglary that went unreported until the next day. A traffic accident that blocked a major intersection for hours. A domestic disturbance call that required all available officers to respond to the same location. The surveillance wasn't meant to watch Chen. It was meant to provide intelligence about when law enforcement resources would be unavailable or distracted. Agent Torres wasn't working for the FBI. He was working for the criminal organization, using Chen's schedule and his department's activities to coordinate criminal operations throughout the county. Asterisk, this is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. Asterisk. Chin called Agent Morrison immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He tried the FBI field office, but they had no record of an Agent Lisa Morrison working on any investigation in his jurisdiction. The realization hit him like a physical blow. There was no federal investigation. The entire story had been an elaborate deception designed to make him paranoid about his own people while the real criminals operated freely in his jurisdiction. Chin had been played by professionals who understood exactly how to manipulate law enforcement's psychology. They'd made him suspicious of his own team, isolated him from the people he should have trusted, and used his paranoia to blind him to what was really happening. But how had they known exactly what to say to make Chin believe their story about federal oversight? The answer was in his personnel files. Chin spent the next hour going through employment records for every member of his department. What he found buried in Janet Lee's file made everything click into place. Before joining the sheriff's department, Janet had worked for a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate intelligence gathering. The firm had been shut down by the state for conducting illegal surveillance operations, but not before Janet had learned sophisticated techniques for gathering information, conducting surveillance, and manipulating targets. Janet wasn't just the department's dispatcher. She was a trained intelligence operative who had been feeding information to Torres and his organization for months. Every call that came into the department, every case they worked, every operation they planned, Janet knew about it all before it happened. She could coordinate criminal activities to avoid police response, and even manipulate Chen's own schedule to make him predictable and vulnerable. Chen confronted Janet that night, after hours, when the station was empty except for the two of them. "How long have you been feeding information to Torres?" he asked simply. Janet looked up from her desk, her expression calm and unsurprised. "Since the day I started working here, Sheriff." "Why?" "Because this job was never about serving and protecting. It was about information gathering. You hired someone with intelligence training without bothering to ask why someone with my background would want to work as a small-town dispatcher." Chin felt like an idiot. Every red flag had been there, but he'd been so focused on finding a qualified candidate that he'd ignored the obvious question. "What's Torres' real name? Does it matter? He's just one operative in a much larger network. You shut him down, they'll send someone else. This isn't about individual actors, Sheriff. This is about systematic infiltration of rural law enforcement." Janet smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Small counties like this are perfect for certain types of operations. Limited resources, minimal oversight, huge geographic areas to patrol. If you can compromise local law enforcement, either through recruitment or through psychological manipulation, you can operate with impunity. We would have caught on eventually. Would you? You've been operating under our influence for 8 months, and you only figured it out because I let you. Every case you've worked, every decision you've made, we've been watching, directing, controlling. You thought you were serving your community, but you've been serving our interests." Shin realized the scope of what had been done to him. His entire recent career as sheriff had been manipulated by people who saw law enforcement as a tool to be controlled. What happens now? Now you have a choice, Sheriff. You can try to expose this operation, knowing that we have documentation of every mistake you've made, every case you've mishandled. Your career will be over, your reputation destroyed. Or you accept that this is the new reality. You work with us instead of against us. You provide the cooperation we need, and in return, your community stays safe, your department stays funded, and your career continues without interruption." Chin stared at Janet, understanding that he was being offered the same choice that had probably been presented to law enforcement officials in dozens of other small communities. Cooperation or destruction. The truly horrifying part was that he could see the logic in it. Fighting would accomplish nothing except his own ruin. But cooperating would make him complicit in crimes he'd spent his career trying to prevent. Chin made his choice, but not the one Janet expected. The next morning, every major news outlet in the state received copies of recordings Chin had made of his conversation with Janet, along with detailed documentation of the infiltration operation and evidence of systematic manipulation of rural law enforcement. Janet was arrested, but Torres disappeared before federal authorities could locate him. The investigation that followed revealed similar operations in 17 other counties across 3 states. Chen's career was over. Too many questions about his judgment, too much damage to public trust. But the exposure of the network prevented its expansion and led to reforms in how rural law enforcement agencies conduct background checks and security assessments. Still, Chen knows it's not over. The organization that recruited Janet and Torres was larger than one state, more sophisticated than one operation. They'll adapt, evolve, and try again somewhere else, with different methods and different targets. And sometimes, late at night, Chen still sees blue sedans in his rearview mirror. He tells himself it's paranoia, residual trauma from months of psychological manipulation. But he's never entirely sure. The shadow protocol never really ends. It just moves to the next target, and the next community that thinks it's safe. Sheriff Maria Santos knew something was wrong when the third major bus turned up empty. 3 months of planning, weeks of surveillance, dozens of officers coordinated for simultaneous raids across Millbrook County, and every single location had been abandoned hours before they arrived. It's like they knew we were coming. Deputy Rodriguez muttered as they stood in yet another vacant warehouse, looking at tire tracks still warm in the dust and cigarette butts that hadn't finished burning. Santos nodded grimly. In 15 years of law enforcement, she'd never seen anything like it. The Reyes organization had been operating in their territory for over a year, moving contraband, laundering money, intimidating witnesses. But every time her department got close, the criminals vanished like smoke. "Maybe we've got a leak," suggested Deputy Chin, the newest member of their team. Santos had considered that possibility. Her department was small, just 8 officers including herself. She'd worked with most of them for years, trusted them with her life. But someone was feeding information to the Reyes organization. Someone was ensuring that every raid failed, every surveillance operation was compromised, every witness disappeared before they could testify. The breakthrough came during a routine check of their evidence storage facility. Santos was conducting her monthly inventory when she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Case files that should have been sealed were showing signs of access. Evidence bags had been opened and resealed. Digital storage devices were missing data that should have been there. Someone with access to the sheriff's department was systematically compromising their investigations. But it wasn't just about stealing evidence or reading files. Someone was actively monitoring their operations in real time, providing intelligence to criminals who used that information to stay ahead of law enforcement. Santos decided to test her theory. During the next staff meeting, she announced a fake operation, a planned raid on a non-existent warehouse on the outskirts of town. She gave specific details, the address, the time, the number of officers involved, even the approach routes they would use. Then she waited. 2 hours after the meeting, Santos drove past the address she'd mentioned. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt road leading to the property, cigarette butts scattered around the area, evidence that someone had been there recently, watching, waiting for a raid that was never going to happen. Someone in her department had passed along the information immediately after the meeting. But who? Santos began watching her officers with new eyes. Deputy Rodriguez had been with the department for 12 years, solid and reliable. Deputy Chin was new but eager, fresh out of the academy. Deputy Williams handled most of their digital evidence processing. Deputy Foster coordinated with other agencies. Deputy Martinez managed their communications systems. Deputy Thompson ran their administrative operations. One of them was a traitor. One of them was selling out every investigation, every operation, every attempt to bring the Reyes organization to justice. But Santos suspected the truth was worse than a simple mole. Asterisk what happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolded. Asterisk. Santos decided to conduct her own investigation. After hours, when the station was empty, she began examining their building's infrastructure with new eyes. The communications equipment, the computer networks, the phone systems, everything that could potentially be used to monitor their activities. What she found in the basement storage room changed everything. Hidden behind boxes of old case files, Santos discovered equipment that shouldn't have been there. Professional-grade recording devices, signal boosters, transmission equipment, all connected to their building's electrical and communications systems. The equipment was sophisticated, expensive, and completely invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. The sheriff's department had been bugged. Not by a mole, not by a corrupt officer, but by the criminals themselves. Every conversation, every meeting, every phone call that took place in the building was being monitored and transmitted to the Reyes organization in real time. Santos traced the equipment's installation to a renovation project that had been completed 8 months earlier. The work had been done by Morrison Security Solutions, a company that specialized in law enforcement facility upgrades. But when Santos tried to contact Morrison Security, she discovered the company had gone out of business shortly after completing their project. The renovation hadn't been about improving their facility. It had been about installing a comprehensive surveillance network that turned the sheriff's department into an intelligence-gathering operation for the criminals they were trying to catch. But Santos realized the situation was even worse than systematic surveillance. When she examined the equipment more closely, she found components that weren't just for listening. There were devices that could intercept and modify digital communications, alter computer files, and even manipulate evidence storage systems. The Reyes organization hadn't just been monitoring law enforcement, they'd been actively sabotaging investigations from the inside. Every case file that had been corrupted, every piece of evidence that had gone missing, every witness who had disappeared, it could all be traced back to the surveillance network hidden in their own building. Santos faced an impossible choice. If she revealed the extent of the compromise, it would destroy public trust in her department and potentially invalidate dozens of cases. If she remained silent, the Reyes organization would continue to operate with impunity, using her own building as their intelligence headquarters. She decided to use the surveillance network against itself. Santos began feeding false information to the listening devices. During fake phone calls conducted alone in her office, she discussed non-existent operations, fictional informants, and imaginary evidence. She created elaborate scenarios about raids that would never happen and witnesses who didn't exist. The results were immediate and terrifying. Within hours of her fake phone call about a fictional witness named Carlos Mendez, a man with that exact name was reported missing from his apartment across town. When Santos mentioned a non-existent stash house on Elm Street, that property was burglarized the same night. The people monitoring their communications weren't just gathering intelligence. They were actively eliminating potential threats based on overheard conversations. They were willing to commit crimes, including violence against innocent people, based on information they intercepted from law enforcement communications. Santos realized she had inadvertently become complicit in targeting innocent civilians. Her fake conversations had provided a hit list to people who saw elimination as their first response to any perceived threat. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay to see the hero put everyone in their place. The weight of what she'd discovered crushed down on Santos like an avalanche. The Reyes organization hadn't just compromised her department, they'd turned it into a weapon against the very community she'd sworn to protect. Every conversation, every plan, every attempt to serve justice had been monitored and used to harm innocent people. But there was something else, something that made her blood run cold when she fully understood the scope of the operation. Santos pulled the personnel files for everyone who had worked on the Morrison security renovation. What she found was a pattern of deaths and disappearances that stretched back 6 months. James Morrison, the company owner, died in a car accident 2 weeks after the installation was completed. Sarah Chin, the project supervisor, reported missing after failing to return from a business trip. David Torres, the lead technician, died of apparent natural causes despite being in perfect health. Lisa Williams, the county administrator who approved the renovation budget, died in a house fire that investigators couldn't explain. Everyone connected to the installation had been systematically eliminated. The surveillance network hadn't just been installed to monitor police activities. It had been part of a larger operation to gain complete control over law enforcement in Millbrook County while eliminating anyone who could expose the truth. Santos realized she was likely next on the list. When she tried to contact federal authorities, she discovered that the phones in her building were routing calls through the surveillance network. Her communications were being intercepted and potentially blocked. Even her attempts to get help were being monitored and controlled. The sheriff's department had become a prison, and Santos was trapped inside with equipment that recorded her every word and monitored her every move. But Santos had one advantage the criminals didn't know about: her personal knowledge of the building's construction. As a long-time resident who had grown up in Millbrook, she knew about the old maintenance tunnels that connected the sheriff's department to the courthouse next door, tunnels that predated the renovation and weren't part of the surveillance network. Using the tunnels, Santos was able to meet with FBI agent Michael Foster at the courthouse without being detected by the listening devices in her own building. "How extensive is the compromise?" Foster asked after Santos explained the situation. "Complete. Every conversation, every investigation, every piece of evidence that passes through our building is monitored and potentially manipulated by the Reyes organization. They've turned our department into their intelligence headquarters." Foster's expression was grim. "This isn't the first case we've seen like this. Rural law enforcement agencies are being systematically compromised through renovation projects that install surveillance equipment. It's happening across multiple states." "How many departments?" "We think dozens. Maybe more. It's a sophisticated operation that targets small communities with limited resources and minimal oversight. Places where a generous offer to upgrade communications and security systems is welcomed without too many questions." Santos felt sick. The Reyes organization wasn't just a local criminal enterprise. They were part of a much larger network that was compromising law enforcement agencies across the region. "What happens now?" "Now we set a trap," Foster said. "We're going to use their own surveillance network to feed them information that will lead them into a federal sting operation." "But Santos, once we move, your career in Millbrook is over. This level of compromise can't be covered up or explained away." Santos understood. Even though she was a victim of the surveillance operation, the public would never fully trust a sheriff whose department had been compromised for months without her knowledge. But she also understood that exposing the network was more important than her career. The federal operation was swift and coordinated. Using the surveillance equipment they'd discovered, agents fed false information to the Reyes organization about a major shipment coming through Millbrook County. When the criminals moved to intercept it, they walked into a federal ambush that resulted in dozens of arrests and the seizure of millions in assets. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the surveillance network. 43 law enforcement agencies across 7 states had been compromised through similar renovation projects. Hundreds of cases had been sabotaged, dozens of witnesses had disappeared, and millions in criminal proceeds had been protected through systematic intelligence gathering. Santos resigned as sheriff 2 weeks after the arrests. The surveillance equipment was removed from the building, but the damage to public trust was irreparable. The community needed new leadership, someone who hadn't been unknowingly compromised by the criminals they were supposed to catch. But even after leaving law enforcement, Santos knew the threat wasn't over. The network that had compromised her department was larger than one organization, more sophisticated than one operation. They would adapt, evolve, and try again in other communities with different methods and different targets. And sometimes, late at night in her new home in another state, Santos still feels like she's being watched. She tells herself it's paranoia, residual trauma from months of unknowing surveillance. But she's learned never to be entirely sure. The listening never really stops. It just moves to the next target, and the next community that thinks their secrets are safe. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.